Hello, Hello, good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to this side event from the front line through the eyes of the indigenous women. We are actually going to discuss issues regarding climate change from indigenous women's perspectives. And it is organized by the FSC Indigenous Foundation and the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities, and also the Mesoamerican Alliance of Peoples of the Forest and the coordination of Mesoamerican women territorial leaders. So welcome once again. Like I said before, the objective of this is to have specific perspectives of indigenous people. And as we all know that indigenous people are affected directly by climate change, and it has not only affected our territories, our food security, our culture, and also our identity, as well as our connection to Mother Earth. So within this framework, indigenous women are also differentially affected by climate change. So meaning indigenous women have specific issues that are tied to them being women and also indigenous at the same time. So considering this differential impact of climate change on indigenous women, this event today is going to actually highlight the link between the effects of climate change and the increased violence against indigenous women and girls. And also, we know that one of the important thematic discussions going around climate change is the issue of loss and damage, which indigenous people are quite much a victim. So this one of the second objectives of this event is to promote more knowledge around loss and damage issues, so that we can have a clear understanding of where we fit and what we can do to support indigenous people to mitigate these loss and damages. And also another objective of this, the third objective, is to discuss about different climate actions that respond in a differentiated way to the needs of indigenous women and girls specifically, as well as empowering them as agents of development in their different communities. So we have here 4 panelists that will be sharing their expertise. All of them are well-seasoned indigenous experts in this area. So I will start by presenting the first person on my left, which is Helen Magata. Helen Magata belongs to the Kadaklan indigenous people of the northern Philippines, and she is the coordinator of the Climate and Biodiversity Program of the Tepteba Foundation. And she is also a member of the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group of the Green Climate Fund and a board member of the Resilience Fund for Climate Justice. So she is definitely going to give us very interesting insights regarding the work of this advisory council and also issues of loss and damage. And then secondly, I would like also to present to you our second panelist, who is Sarah Omi. She is an indigenous leader of the Embera people of Panama, and she is the president of the Mesoamerican Alliance of Peoples and Forests, which is one of the organizing entity of this event. And she promotes empowerment of Embera women in her community through the rescue of ancestral knowledge. And also she is the president of the coordinating committee of the Alliance of Peoples and Forests, and elected to represent women in the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities this year. So she has been recognized by Forbes magazine as one of the 100 most influential women in Central America. So we will be happy to get her experience on this panel today. And thirdly, I would like to present to you Balkisu Buba, who is the vice president of the Cameroonian section of Repaliak. And she is a Mbororo Fulani pastoralist from Cameroon. She is a social worker, and she is also the founder and president of the Association of Indigenous Peoples and Sustainable Development, IPSD Cameroon. And she is also at the same time the vice coordinator, national coordinator of the Network of Indigenous Peoples and Local Communities for Sustainable Management of Forest Ecosystems in Central Africa, Repaliak. So she has also been working tirelessly and extensively on community development, climate actions, land rights, natural resource management, and women's empowerment. So we have really big indigenous experts sitting on this table. So last but not the least, I will be happy to present our sister Etna Kaptoyo, who is a Grants and Partnership Officer at the Pawanka Fund of IPAC. So she is also, she has over 15 years of experience in social development and indigenous people's rights, environmental governance in practice, and policy advocacy with a focus on gender equality. So she is currently the lead representative of the Facilitative Working Group for Indigenous Peoples in Africa at the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform, LCIP, of the UNFCCC, which is an inclusive space that brings people together. So these are our panelists, and we will not waste much of the time. I have some 4 questions that we will be discussing around the table. And so I will start from my right. And Ellen, if you could kindly share with us what losses and damages have indigenous women faced as a result of climate change? And if in your community, have you been able to identify any link or relationship between increase in violence against indigenous women and girls as a result of this climate change? You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Rabiatu. I don't know how much time I have, but yeah. I'm going to speak on the second question first. Is there a link between climate change and the increasing violence of indigenous women's rights? Definitely there is. And I'm going to share the experience of my community. So I come from a community of a very small village in Mountain Province, north of the Philippines. And increasingly there's a migration of women from the village to the city. And this is not because they just want to go to the city. Opportunities, there are more opportunities in the cities now because we don't, our source of livelihood in the community is diminished because of climate change. And this again responds to your question about increasing violation of women's rights because of climate change. So what kind of job do they do in the city? They look for jobs, menial jobs, where they're more exposed to sexual harassment, unfair treatment because of unfair job treatment, and they have to leave their children. I have a neighbor, I have a cousin. They have to leave their small children to their grandmothers because they have to look for better opportunities in the cities. And global figures would show us that women are 14 times more likely to die during national disasters. This is proven in many countries, and this is because of many social, cultural, and political realities of women. So I don't know if it's still a question whether there's an increasing violence of women because of climate change. I think that's already a given. It's just that many of these stories of women and children and young girls are not being put in the spotlight. That's why we still ask the same question. Another one is language. And in loss and damage, language is something that you cannot really pay. Can you compensate if language is dead or if it goes extinct? Of course not. Language is dying because of the natural connection to the land and territory of indigenous peoples. If you lose the land, if you lose the practice of, for instance, in my community, we are losing the practice of mutual labor, helping one another in our agricultural practice. And this is because we are now practicing the planting of high-yielding varieties of corn, which is so much dependent on middlemen, and you get herbicides, pesticides, everything, which makes labor cheaper, but also kills the land. And because of that, we are now losing the actual, the indigenous practices of helping one another, including the languages that are very connected to the agricultural practice that we do. And these are the kinds of losses that we are unfortunately not very much included in figures and also in data that we have or we get from our governments.
Thank you very much, Helen. Actually, yes, I agree with you, and I think all of us, we do agree that there are a lot of issues facing us due to this impact of climate change, and some of the things are definitely interrelated, from migration to security issues, and also the issue of losing certain cultural aspects that can never be compensated. So it is something that we need to figure out what kind of actions that indigenous people and communities should take. So, Sarah, you have the floor.
Sí, buenas tardes, agradecerle por este espacio con estas mujeres que día a día trabajan y resisten por alcanzar esa igualdad de derechos a nivel interno de nuestras comunidades y fuera de las comunidades. El trabajo que realizamos pues dentro de nuestras comunidades y en la región pues de Mesoamérica es justamente cómo potenciar la voz de las mujeres en todos los contextos, de cómo puedan existir políticas que puedan integrar la visión de los pueblos indígenas y de las mujeres para poder mantener los conocimientos de nuestras abuelas y abuelos dentro de nuestras comunidades. Pero también no estamos ajenas de las múltiples consecuencias, pues también que llegan, o malas prácticas que, como lo decía la hermana Helen, que llegan a nuestras comunidades, y ante eso pues toca también trabajar triplemente y buscar las estrategias de mayor, de mayor responsabilidad, porque de un lado tenemos todo lo negativo que podemos encontrar en nuestro territorio: violencia, la falta de acceso a nuestra propia medicina tradicional, a la falta de cómo también reparar a nuestra madre tierra. Pero de un lado también vemos la iniciativa de las mujeres con muchas ganas de poder mantener vivo ese legado cosmogónico y espiritual de nuestros pueblos, donde mujeres están restaurando bosques, están trabajando por tener la propia soberanía alimentaria, retomando la agricultura con pertinencia cultural, tradicional de nuestros pueblos. Pero lo más importante es cómo poder avanzar hacia a que las tomas de decisiones también las mujeres estén involucradas y visibles en todos los contextos. La participación de las mujeres siempre debe ser garantizada y debe ser también importante, porque somos las mejores guardianas pues de los conocimientos, que transmitimos esos conocimientos que van de generación en generación, y esto es lo que permite también hacernos mayor resistente en el tiempo. Y también es importante de que nuestro trabajo sean visibles para que esa voz esté a nivel interno en nuestras comunidades como fuera, para que se pueda encontrar ese equilibrio que necesitamos en cuanto a la participación de las mujeres y en cuanto también a la información que se requiere para poder buscar el equilibrio que se necesitan dentro de nuestros territorios.
Thank you very much, Sarah. We see that most of the challenges are almost the same. It's just a difference of context and so on, but we all kind of face the same. So thank you very much, Sarah. I will pass the mic on to Balkisu to tell us about loss and damages within her own community and from her own perspective and the relationship that she can identify.
Thank you very much, Rabiatu. For me, I see that there is the relationship between climate change and indigenous women and violence. It's a reality because if you see, for example, you have women who at first used to just get some resources around their homes, like water. You see that they go to fetch water in nearby places, but now with the advent of climate change, you see that waters have been drying off. And as a result of waters drying off, you see women trekking long distances to go get water for their families. And when they go for long distances to get water, they become victims of violence. They can be harassed on the road. They can have a different type of problems on the road when they go to fetch this water, which is a resource that they need at home. You see, women also in the indigenous communities, they use firewood to cook. They go around to pick firewood to come and cook. And when they go now far away to go and pick firewood in the bushes, they can be bitten by snakes. They can also be harassed. So women are victims of rape when they go out to carry out some of these activities which are no longer in the normal spaces where they used to carry them out. We have these long seasonal migrations like during transhumance where women have to move from one place to the other in search of pastures. When these women are moving, at first maybe they can move shorter distances to get these pastures, but now they have to go far away, cross towns or even cross borders to go in search of pastures. And when they have to do this trans-border migration, they face violence from other communities where they pass by, maybe they pass on a farm where they destroy some crops. You find that at the end of the day, if the cattle destroy crops, the communities that are farming, they become a big conflict between farmers and grazers. So you see that at the end of the day, this issue of climate change has really increased violence on indigenous women and girls, and we think that something needs to be done in order to combat climate change so that we can reduce violence on women and girls.
Thank you very much, Balkisu Buba. Your conclusion is going to lead us to our second question, but before then, we would give the floor to Edna to hear the perspectives of indigenous women from Kenya.
Yeah, thank you, Rabiatu, and thank you all for joining us on these last days of the session, and to my fellow panelists, our indigenous women. Basically, like indigenous women role depends on natural resources and access, and also societal roles also makes us more vulnerable to impacts of climate change because access to food or household food and also a lot of collective efforts within the communities dependent on the women a lot. Like my community where I come from, the Pokot, even building houses is dependent on indigenous women. So we are supposed to build, and these are the resources that are becoming more scarce. A lot of healthcare practice is also dependent on indigenous women. And most practitioners are women, including some from my family. And so talking to them, you hear a lot of these medicinal plants, for instance, are not found. The grass you need to thatch your house is not found closer. And also sometimes it's in a protected area that you cannot access, or if you access, it's considered illegal. And so there's violence also from those working around those protected areas that has been blocked off from the community, yet it's community land. And so what we see is that with climate change and the socio-ecological impacts it has, and to the women, a lot of them now start to experience a lot of unsafe situations, not only within the community but also outside, because when there's no food, there's a lot of challenges and conflict within the family. And then within the community as well, we live with other indigenous communities. We border each other. And so during migration as communities as well are moving, or those who are farming, there's a lot of conflict. And the biggest casualties are indigenous women and children in most of these communities, and also in my community. So if there's violence and a lot of fight for natural resources, it's women. But then we don't forget that even with the climate change impacts, the response measures being done. Also, a lot of people coming to the community constructing dam. So you have a lot of impact within the environment. Like for some time back, we had cases where impact was done and on a big dam, and there was a lot of water overflow and also some landslide that happened. Of course, people will not acknowledge that dam because it affected those on the other side of the hill. And a lot of victims were women and children as well. And so there's a lot of unsafe situation, but also violence, as they've mentioned, experience, but it's beyond that, and it's within communities and also outside, because also when people are not living in safe spaces, they are lacking food, mental well-being is not also being observed. And in our communities, people don't talk about mental wellness. And also, when people are depressed, so this results in a lot of violence, and we've seen a lot of cases. And then also moving to that, I think also we need to also speak about the access to sexual and reproductive health rights. When we have impacts of climate change and also these displacements that happen with flooding, with the drought, you know, and those, and I feel this is a form of violence as well. It shouldn't be only the physical as well, because also we experience the different kind of violence as well as Indigenous women. So I think because of that dependence and the link to violence, there's been a lot of studies and the linkage and stories, and I think it's a good topic and timely conversation that we are having. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edna, and thank you everyone for this first round of discussion. So from all the different experiences we have heard from our panelists, there is no doubt that we are facing a lot of challenges, first as a community and then also as women in particular. So my second question to you will be, what are some of the notable actions now that we know in our communities it is asserted that we are facing all of these challenges? So what are some of the notable actions taken by you, our indigenous community leaders, and also other community, indigenous community women? What are some of these notable actions or initiatives that focus on empowering our indigenous women to be able to mitigate and, you know, go through and reduce the stress from all of these effects of climate change? So now I think I will start from the other way, and Edna.
I hope this microphone is audible. Is it? Okay. Yeah, I think there's a lot Indigenous women are doing. Women for a long time have been socially organizing to tackle different challenges that they are facing in the community. And one way I've seen it's women more organizing more really to address collective issues, to access to food. So you find in some communities, even mine, women are starting to think, what are our traditional foods that are drought tolerant? We are cattle keepers and livestock keepers, so they look at what are the kind of medicine traditional that can also keep pests away or even heal, because there are also incidents of increasing the diseases. So women are also doing that. As well, what we've had with women, because there are some who are doing crafts that are dependent on the ecosystem, what they're doing is also doing in situ conservation, conserving those plants and trying to plant them at homesteads, and, you know, planting the plants that they wouldn't find at home, and trying to also restore waterways, for instance, you know, traditional wells, and protecting that, and also working with the community to restore the traditional governance for managing water. And more importantly, they are working with the children and youth and doing intergenerational learning amongst the different communities that also have interacted with or seen their work that they do. So they're also facilitating that space to strengthen dialogue. On the other hand, in terms of what they're doing, they're reviving traditional practices of even preserving food, for instance, so that when there's drought, there is, like, I didn't know in my community, we could store fruits, wild fruits, for instance, for more than even 5 years, but women are doing that now, you know, trying to revive that, and also looking at the traditional plants that they were using before, and also calling for the protection. So they're also engaging in policy advocacy to inform policy space what can be done to really put women's voices and provide spaces for them to influence policy and also climate change actions that is being done at the different levels, since it's already ongoing. But I think that's for a start I could try to say. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Balkisu, we would like to hear from you also regarding specific initiatives in your community that women are carrying to, mitigate the impacts of climate change and the losses that they are facing.
Okay, thank you very much. For us, what we are doing, we are carrying out alternative livelihood initiatives where we have communities, we teach them now agriculture. Instead of doing only pastoralism, they do also agriculture. Like the hunter-gatherer communities, we teach them farming, and then we teach them things like agroecology, where they can use they do the farming without using chemical fertilizers that can destroy the environment and so on. So we also carry out intergenerational knowledge transfers. We have so many intergenerational dialogues that we carry out in the community so that the older generation, the knowledge holders, can transfer that knowledge, especially on climate issues and conservation of natural resources, to the younger generations. And in some communities, after the trainings, we create intergenerational dialogue platforms that are led by youths, and we intentionally make them to be led by youths and women, because we know that the youths are the people who benefit from this knowledge, use this knowledge now, and then preserve this knowledge for future use. Another thing we are doing is, after the intergenerational knowledge transfer, we will do domestication of traditional medicinal plants, where we open gardens, where we put the traditional plants that are about to disappear, some of them that they can no longer be found because of climate change. We plant them, we try to domesticate them so that they will have these plants at their doorsteps when they want to do traditional rituals and so on. And it can also serve as a learning and a research center for indigenous knowledge. Women are equally involved in tree planting exercises, where we plant trees in the community. As we know, trees are very good for the environment. They regulate the environment, they sequestrate carbon, and they ensure water and food security. In the sense that when they plant these trees, they have fruits that they can always take to the market and sell. They can eat those fruits that come from those trees, and they can plant the trees around water catchments so that it prevents water from drying off. And these trees, they can also provide them shade. When, as you know, indigenous communities were always moving, so we need the shade at times to rest. We are also exploring other alternative energy cooking sources with women. Instead of cooking with the firewood that emits a lot of smoke, we try to look at improve clay cooking stoves that we teach the women to construct. When they construct it, they can use just 1 or 2 firewoods to cook a whole meal. And we also teach them how to do fireless cooking bags, that they might start cooking on the fire with the improved cooking stove, and then they take the pot and put it in the fireless cooking bag. They put it there, they close, the food will get ready, and then the food will stay warm all day. They don't need to light fire again to warm the food and so on. So that's another alternative energy source we are teaching them to use, as well as solar energy. They use now solar energy in their homes, and this has helped them to some sort of fight against violence, because at first the women have to leave the community, pay transport to go to the nearby towns, pay another money to sit there and charge their phones, sit there doing nothing. You have to wait maybe for 2-3 hours for your phone to be full before you pay another transport to go back to your community. Some even trek to go charge their phones, and on the way they are victims of violence. But nowadays, with solar energy that they have in their communities, they can charge their phones, they can always communicate in real time, and they can always carry out their financial transactions with the other communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Balkisu. Thank you very much for the extensive experience. So we will give the floor to our sister Sarah to hear from the other side.
Sí, cuando hablamos de las acciones que realizamos las mujeres dentro de las comunidades, primero quiero contarle un poquito sobre mi experiencia. Siento que para poder lograr acciones con toda la libertad desde esa perspectiva de mujeres, siempre tenemos que romper barreras a nivel interno dentro de nuestras comunidades, porque es allí donde también el machismo es muy, es muy vivo dentro de nuestras comunidades, y cuando las mujeres queremos cambiar las visiones sin apartarnos de esa esencia de nuestros pueblos, pues siempre tendemos a encontrar barreras que nos imponen. Y la primera acción que considero que he realizado es justamente cómo hacer incidencia política a nivel interno y externo dentro de nuestras comunidades para poder visibilizar las voces de las mujeres a nivel, en el caso mío, a nivel de Panamá. Y esto mismo ha logrado también encontrar la solidaridad a nivel de la región, como es la coordinadora de mujeres líderes territoriales de Mesoamérica, donde trabajamos de la mano con organizaciones de mujeres que trabajan la soberanía alimentaria, jardines botánicos, porque ahí está todo el conocimiento de las mujeres, el tema del empoderamiento económico, pero también de manera sostenible, que no lastima a nuestra madre tierra. También mujeres que están en la causa de defensa de derechos, porque así como lo comentaban mis hermanas, muchas nos convertimos líderes a causa pues de la misma presión, de la invisibilidad de nuestras voces, porque sus hijas han sido secuestradas o porque sus hijas han sido violentadas, y esto es lo que ayuda también a buscar esos cambios positivos que necesitamos. La violencia no solo son los efectos climáticos, sino que esto trae muchos elementos negativos que afectan nuestra propia espiritualidad, que afectan nuestra propia esencia de ser mujer dentro de nuestras comunidades, y por eso la solidaridad en las diversas plataformas de organizaciones es lo que nos permite también a construir estrategias desde nuestra propia participación. Y en la región pues mía, a través pues de la coordinadora de mujeres, recientemente hemos elaborado también nuestro plan de género y cambio climático, porque queremos trabajarlo desde nuestra propia perspectiva. Queremos mantener esas mismas condiciones y equilibrio que nos permitan desarrollarnos desde nuestras propias enseñanzas, desde nuestros propios valores culturales y espiritual, para poder buscar el equilibrio que necesita nuestra madre tierra.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So, Helen, we would like to hear the Asian perspective.
Thank you very much. I don't know what else to add. The sharing from my co-women here are very rich. But I think there's a lot of stereotype and expectation put on women. And women have been doing a lot, fulfilling this pressure and fulfilling this role of this imposed gender stereotype. Doing things for the collective, doing things for the family, for the community. But at the end of the day, women forget that we are also individuals. And there's one beautiful initiative in the city where I live. It's called the Center of Women for Hope. It was established during the COVID pandemic to help people with mental well-being. But it eventually evolved to include many other situations, like disasters, for instance. So recently there's an increased suicide cases of young people in my city, and the Center for Women of Hope was there to really listen to women and to young people, because you can rarely find spaces for such discussion. Yeah, it's easier to find, for instance, support for cooperatives, which women are also doing. They're engaging with the market, they're engaging with the private sector, with non-government organizations outside their communities, and also with the government, because they want to take spaces. And it's easier to find this kind of spaces. But again, it's more difficult to find spaces to address the human and the individual need of women as a human person. There are other examples that I can provide, like women are still teaching about the language, our indigenous language, to their children, and this is something that is seen as natural, and thus it's not given the value that it should have. They're doing seed exchanges. I remember when I went back to my community, there's one meeting of women where they all have their own seeds to exchange, because they said it's difficult now to look for the indigenous seeds in their communities. Diversification of livelihoods, I think that's also shared here, and creating economic opportunities and taking up the limited spaces that they are able to create within the realm of their socio-political and cultural limitations in the communities.
Thank you, Helen. So we have seen how women are really doing a lot in our communities, and we know that in this climate action discussion that is going around, we are seeing that our climate advocates from the indigenous communities, we are very much pushing for the importance of our traditional knowledge in mitigating climate change impacts. So we would just want to know from you if you can provide us like 2 specific examples on how traditional knowledge has actually in practice helped communities to adapt to climate change, especially that traditional knowledge that is being used by women and understood and shared. So it's kind of a continuation of the first question, so we want to just focus a little bit to understand about how traditional knowledge is concretely used, if you can share some best practices and examples from your community.
One example that I can think of right now is the traditional forest management of indigenous peoples in our region. This has been recognized by the local government and also the national government. That is, they term it differently. Like I can't remember the terminology that they put it, but that they use. But it's recognized as sound forest management practice, and it's put into law to recognize it. The second one is that it's not even if it's not recognized by both the local and national government, but indigenous peoples have been practicing management of scarce resources. One of which is, for instance, the scarcity of water. And there's a practice in our region that is called lampisa, where indigenous peoples, including women and youth, are guarding the source of the water, and they are dividing the water according to the need of the community. So that because a lot of tribal wars break out because of water scarcity, and to be able to ensure that that doesn't happen, there's community practice of really ensuring that water is equitably distributed according to the needs of the community. And this has been going for many years. This is not to solve climate change, but it's a practice that is now being also considered and recognized as a climate change solution. Thanks.
Thank you. Sarah?
El ejemplo que puedo mencionar de que puede aportar al cambio climático, bueno, primero yo vengo de una comunidad que fue reubicada forzosamente por la construcción de una hidroeléctrica, y los saberes y conocimiento de mis abuelos y de líderes han puesto sobre la mesa de que a pesar de las dificultades de violaciones de derechos, se puede encontrar una nueva casa y renovarla nuevamente. Yo creo que esa es una de las buenas prácticas que tenemos, a pesar de la violación de derecho al territorio. Hemos logrado estar en un nuevo territorio buscando las diversas alternativas de cómo restaurarla, de cómo repararla, y eso estamos haciendo especialmente en mi territorio con el trabajo de las mujeres.
Thank you. Balkisu?
Thank you very much. I will talk about traditional grazing. When you see the way the indigenous communities, they graze, like the pastoralist community, they live from one place to the other. And when they live from one place to the other, traditionally they are leaving the area they have been grazing so that this area can regenerate. The resources that are on the place can regenerate, because if they do overgrazing on a particular piece of land, it will lead to land degradation. We also have a traditional way of thinking and doing things, of taking only what we need in nature, or what is required, that is something that we need, not taking everything because that we don't even need to go with. For example, if you see the hunter-gatherer communities and the pastoralist communities, when they are carrying out their activities during the day or moving, if for example they come across a fruit tree, they will harvest only what they need to eat, and then they continue, they go and eat. Not that they will harvest all the fruits and then go and keep in the house and it is spoiled, it is getting bad in their house. This is a traditional way of life that makes them to know that there is another person who also needs those fruits, who will come and also harvest and eat. And they know that as we are going like that, others need it. Even when they go hunting, a person going for hunting goes to do hunting, he targets that, he knows that, okay, I have 5 members in my household and we can eat this quantity of meat, and then once he has an animal that can feed his family, he comes home and he leaves the rest of the animal in the forest. And you see, we also, women, they also use traditional knowledge to look at early warning signs, because when they look at some signs in the community, they can already predict what will happen in the next 2 weeks, what will happen in the next 1 month, whether there will be drought, whether there will be floods, or what will happen. And there they start taking measures. They know that in the next 2 weeks, this is what is going to happen in the environment, or this is what is going to happen in the weather. So they start taking measures to see how they can adapt to the situation or how they can mitigate the risk. Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of building resilience, a lot of it depends on the traditional knowledge that women are custodians of. In my community, one example is where women are using traditional technology and also of knowing how to map where the water is, and also revitalizing that knowledge, and also the process on how to excavate as well the groundwater in most places, because we don't have enough seasonal rivers or streams, but a few streams, but most places depend on groundwater. And so they know that, and also how to check to know the quality in terms of if it's fit for human consumption. So a lot of that from the women, but also, and I think Balkisu and the rest has touched on it, I think women also helping in climate information sharing, and also helping community define as well, again, and revitalize these traditional seasonal calendars. Because that was, people were not using a lot, and so they're reviving that, people to understand that, and also helping with the traditional weather forecasting that's needed. We know a lot of landscape in some areas are degraded, and it's women who understand the ecology of the place, what tree can grow and what will not grow in a particular ecosystem. And so they provide this guidance a lot within the community, and also to government policy makers, where a particular tree species can work, especially when they're doing a lot of restoration work. Yeah. So that's few.
Thank you very much. It's simply from all the discussions and all the experiences you are sharing, we are seeing that our indigenous cultures are a culture of sharing. So we think about the next person. We don't just consume everything and forget about our future generations. So considering all of these things that we have discussed, and considering that we are in a policy advocacy space, so we know that we have seen the role indigenous women are playing. So definitely every stakeholder has a role to play to sort this issue out. So the next question is going to be what specific actions or we can address to the different stakeholders, like governments, like donors, like philanthropic organizations, or social and humanitarian actors. What kind of actions should they take to address like the specific needs and context of indigenous women? So that is going to be our last question. So it's like a call to action, and what specific recommendations do you have? So I will start from Edna.
Yeah, I think First, there needs to be a recognition of the role. I think there is that recognition of role women play in terms of building climate resilience for the collective within their communities, but that really doesn't manifest. Mere acknowledgement isn't what we need alone. I think we need real actions and also involvement of women in climate policy and decision making at the global level and also local level and regional. That is limited still. A lot of indigenous women are still not accessing that space. A lot of work is being done by women with little or limited resources or no funding, and I think a lot of resources needs to be dedicated to communities, to indigenous women-led organization, indigenous people's organization, and for women really to put those initiatives to scale and also to support what they do. Also because then having those cases, they're able to showcase but also support the collective. And having the support as well to be in this participate in this policy space, you know, it's limited for a lot of women. So I think resources being dedicated to women, not only technical but financial, also and other kind of resources that women might need, whether in terms of capacity, where they need to reduce, but also support as well to build these socio-economic enterprises or things that can support their livelihood. I think is required. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Balkisu, what will be your call to action?
Thank you very much. My call to action will be investing in traditional knowledge. We should valorize the traditional knowledge of indigenous people. We should integrate this knowledge into our adaptation and mitigation policies at the national and international level. We should make sure that we make good use of this knowledge and protect the knowledge equally. We should also have a direct access to finance for women, because accessing finance for women is a whole struggle. We need indigenous women organizations to access finance so that they can implement their activities on the ground for better adaptation and mitigation to climate change. We need to equally involve them in decision making, as my sister Edna said, because the women are always left behind in the indigenous communities. As you know, they suffer double discrimination. They are first of all discriminated by their own community, discriminated by the other communities outside. So decision making, access to decision making spaces becomes difficult. So we think that if they bring these women on the table for discussions and decisions, things will get better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sarah, what will you say to the different stakeholders in 1 minute?
Sí, también me acojo a las palabras que comentaban. Uno de los grandes retos que tienen las mujeres y los pueblos indígenas, y que en estos espacios de la COP se ha debatido mucho, es el acceso al financiamiento. Pero ese acceso al financiamiento tiene que ir directamente a las mujeres, a los pueblos indígenas, guardianes de los bosques, de los conocimientos, y que aquí lo que se busca es precisamente cómo reforzar las grandes presiones que existen dentro de los territorios por la constante vulneración de derechos, la falta de oportunidades hacia las mujeres y jóvenes, y es fundamental poder a que se rompan esas brechas de desigualdades y puedan tocar y haber justicia climática en todo el contexto de nuestro trabajo y de nuestras luchas.
Thank you, Sarah. Helen?
Thank you very much. I can't agree more with this beautiful, powerful women in front. I heard somewhere that women shouldn't be empowered, because if knowledge is power, and if we agree that women hold that knowledge, then they should be powerful already, right? It's just that there's no enough spaces for them to exercise and show that power. For the longest time, indigenous women are regarded as beneficiaries, as grantees, as someone who needs help and donations. But that shouldn't be. If we hold that knowledge and we hold that power, then we should be regarded as equal partners and as decision makers. The call is for indigenous women to be provided that space and for them to be able to really exercise the knowledge that they have and really show the world the power that they can do. And let's see, they're not a ticking box exercise. We see a lot of institutions with very robust policies on gender. Funding proposals, you will see that there's very good gender action plans. But again, we are not a checkbox exercise. Let us have that space for indigenous women to exercise the power that they have. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And once again, thank you to all our participants. So we have had the chance to listen from the different experiences from our different sociocultural regions. So right now I will give like 5 minutes to the floor. If you have any question addressed to a specific panelist or anything you would want to add regarding the different questions that they were discussing. So you have the floor. Anybody? Grace.
The only one we have. You can use this. No, I would just like to add to what you have said, very important things that you have said, but what I wanted now is to reiterate that we should change our narrative from direct access to allocation of dedicated fund for indigenous peoples and indigenous women from our fund donors, because we always compete with other NGOs or other indigenous peoples organizations in general. But if we have dedicated fund for indigenous women or for indigenous peoples as well, then and then there should also be a simplified direct access process or mechanism on how we will be accessing this dedicated fund. Because we always say that direct access, and the climate funds always say, or the donors would always say, but you can directly access. But it's not really true, because we cannot compete with NGOs and other organizations who are faster, or they have systems in place to directly access it. And once we put into our system, we cannot follow the system of accessing the funds. So I repeat, it should be call for dedicated funds for indigenous women, indigenous peoples, and indigenous youth, for example. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Yeah, Aisatu, do you have a question? Any other person? Okay. So if there is no other question, I will say, as we used to say in class, it means we have understood everything and we don't have any question. So I will just use this opportunity to thank you once again to all our panelists and the organizers for creating this space to be able to discuss these issues that are very dear to our hearts. And from everything we have been hearing, not only in this panel, but in different spaces within this scope, we can conclude that our lives as indigenous people can never be the same, for sure, because we do not have access to these resources and they are sure not going to ever come back. So we are obliged to find coping mechanisms to live. We have seen that issues of migration and safety and conflict and disasters ranging to mental wellness and even health rights, all of this lead to different kinds of violence, not even only for women, but specifically for women, but it is an issue of all our communities. It leads to both physical, social, and psychosocial violence. But the good news is that we have seen how indigenous people, we are taking up all these different spaces to push for our collectives and family rights. We have seen like the experiences they have shared from, we are doing things ranging from social organizations to, taking up spaces in new arenas like technology, solar, biogas, and also we are into the different advocacy spaces trying to spread our voices and our perspectives like what we are doing now. And also we are taking up enough spaces in the issue of exploring new economic and livelihoods opportunities opportunities for our communities. So, and we have also seen the very importance of traditional knowledge, which is kind of the cornerstone and shows how indigenous peoples for decades, without even enough resources, we have been able and succeeded in preserving our environment. So it is a culture of sharing, like I said before, and we have seen the different techniques we have shared, like traditional grazing, water rationing, ecological guidance in our territories, and also issue of early warning systems. So we can get out from here. What I am taking back home as a call to action is that yes, we have been acknowledged as indigenous people. We have been acknowledged, our rules have been acknowledged in different spaces, different policy documents, but we are saying here that mere acknowledgement is not sufficient, and that we need more concrete actions to be implemented in our favor. And that we also, one of the things that stands out is the issue of resources. Just our last speaker just mentioned that the issue of language is very important. It's not just about resources, but it is about, changing the narratives and speaking about direct allocation of funds to indigenous people. And also we want, one of our panelists rightly highlighted it, that we want space, we want to be provided space to exercise our rights and show the power that we all have as indigenous women. And we all hope, I will conclude by saying that we are trying our best as indigenous women, and we know we can count on the indigenous men to support our advocacy processes. So thank you.